I'll keep just kind of letting you know to pop yourself on mute, and obviously keep your videos off. We are discussing managing sickness absence. I was just talking to Robbie before we started. Always one of my favourite seminars to do. I think it's very relatable to nearly everyone's organisation. So always a good seminar. That brings me on to kind of introductions for today. You'll have seen from the material coming out. This is a joint seminar this morning between obviously myself at Chadwick Lawrence, and I'm joined, as you'll see in the top left hand corner, by Robbie Rouse from Evaluate.
Everyone.
Yeah, Robbie, can we give a wave? Yeah. Robbie's at Evaluate, who are our technological partners with Box. Evaluate are a HR management system that Robbie's going to talk to you all about at the second half of the seminar. Evaluate is a system that we use ourselves at Chadwick Lawrence, and obviously goes as part of our BoxHR scheme that many of you will be aware of. So I wanted to get Robbie in this morning to kind of obviously share his thoughts from a technological standpoint on managing sickness absence, and obviously to demonstrate the system. So final introduction, also joined by my colleague Laura Taylor this morning. Laura is Robbie and I's producer. She's letting you all in. She's administers it, and she'll look after the chat function. So plan for this morning is as follows. I'm going to go first and do approximately 35-40 minutes on the legal side of obviously managing sickness absence. I'll then hand over to Robbie, who will go through obviously the technological side of that. At the end, we'll then have some time for some questions. Obviously, anyone who's obviously joined us before on one of the seminars, what we usually do is adopt the chat function in Zoom. So if anyone's struggling to find it, it's on the same toolbar as your mute and stop your video. So just use that chat function to kind of ask any questions of Robbie or I, either on a technological standpoint or a legal one. Depending on time, we'll either answer them on the day, or if we are stretched for time, we'll respond in writing. It's kind of nice, relatively small group today. So again, if time allows, we might actually also let people on video if you are brave enough. So we've already had a question from Carol, so that's good. We're getting some questions in already. So yeah, I'll start today. I can and then pass over to Robbie in about half an hour or so. So first introductions. I think from looking at everything, I know everyone, but if anyone doesn't know who I am, I should have introduced myself. It's Sam Pawson, partner at Chadwick Lawrence. Managing sickness absence. I'm really going to split my part in three, if I can today. So maybe counterintuitively, I'm going to split it and start with long-term sickness absence. Then I'm going to talk a bit about a disability piece, and then I'm going to go and move on to short-term absence. So I'm going to do it in, as I say, perhaps a counterintuitive way, but I think you'll see why I'm doing that. Caveat today, what the focus really is on here is managing sickness absence. What this isn't is a disability discrimination event, nor is it an unfair dismissal. Obviously, those two topics often can be the outcome if we get this wrong. So we're going to be conscious of that throughout. I'm going to refer to it, but I'm not going to go into the level of detail about talking about potential disability discrimination claims, how we deal with an unfair dismissal, the tests of unfair dismissal. We'll just reference it as we go. So I will now share my screen and pop in my slides for today, again for you all to see. No one wants to see my notes, so there we go. So, right, managing sickness absence. What I would always look at first with sickness absence cases is, a rather simple question really is why. Why bother? Why manage absence proactively? And what I started with this morning was a kind of observation and comment that, from what I see day to day with my clients, I think still, although there are other areas, but I still think that sickness absence is the issue that causes companies more stress, more time and more anxiety dealing with them than any other type of issues, whether that be disciplinaries, grievances. I still think that sickness absence is the most difficult to deal with. Even I think that's going to become more so with what we're going through at the moment, obviously connected to the pandemic. I think following on from this, we're going to have to manage this. If we're not already, there are going to be more issues coming out with that, whether that be stress and anxiety claims, whether that's going to be long COVID. So it's something that we're going to have to deal with. We're going to have to live with. So why manage absence proactively? I think is fairly self-evident. But obviously, some of the things that came to my mind. Obviously, you want to reduce absence levels. You want to get that down. The cost of absence to organisations is huge, billions of pounds nationally each year. We want to avoid claims, and again, that's the point of attending seminars such as today, and obviously seeking assistance. And that's our, my aim as a lawyer is to help you avoid claims. Efficient business planning, that stress of when someone is off, the impact of the impact of that elsewhere, the cover that's needed, the strain it's putting on all the members of staff. I always give my personal example of my wife, who's a teacher, and I think that in the teaching profession is more so than most the idea of someone goes off, others have to cover. They then become stressed themselves. They go off, and there's this vicious cycle. So, the more efficient we can in planning absences, the better. Obviously, we want to retain valued employees. I think there's often a stigma if people are going off sick that they immediately are a problem. No, there are valuable employees here. If we manage it proactively, we can talk about getting them back into employment rather than always this being a discussion about their removal. Final one is one that I think I deal with most days. This problem will not resolve itself. The amount of conversations I have with clients who ring me up after a month and say, Sam, so-and-so has been off with stress for a month. We talk through an absence management problem. We agree some steps moving forward. The client goes away. I hear nothing for 2 months. They ring me back in month 3 and goes, "Oh, Sam, by the way, this person's still off. What can we do about it?" So it's not going to resolve itself. You need to look at it, and you need to look at it early. In terms of how, so we've looked at a why, but in terms of a how, again, none of this is rocket science. It's all about process, steps, and really making an effort. The first two, again, I think no-brainers. Early contact and then regular catch-ups. There's a fear, and again, something I deal with in practice a lot. There is a fear that when someone is off sick, you as an employer cannot contact them. You can't, this idea that if you're contacting them, you're harassing them, you're bullying them to come back into the workplace. Therefore, they're left alone. Again, absolute opposite. The more you can, the more contact you plan, the better. I'm not advocating we're contacting someone every day saying, "Are you better yet? Are you better yet? Are you better yet?" This is about a structure and putting something in place that doesn't leave people isolated. Again, you'll see on the second bullet point, in quotation, I've put the term catch-ups. Some organisations have quite strict processes and they have return to work interviews, and they call them return to work interviews. Again, sometimes the semantics in that, I think if you call something a return to work, someone is not, again, in a position that they feel they can return to work, that meeting is therefore avoided, or it doesn't have the effect, because it's that kind of idea that they have to return immediately. So look at what they call, look at the language, something neutral, catch-ups would be our recommendation. Again, hopefully before we get into an absence, can we spot these issues? Stress, as I say, probably the most regular issue I deal with, and I'm sure that's the same for all of your organisations. Stress and anxiety. So, can we catch this before it comes? A few suggestions there. Stress risk assessments, have a look, ear to the ground. Do you see anything occurring? Therefore, can you have a meeting to kind of assess the risk? Some organisations have mental health days. Again, concept that's good. Again, I'd be worried, cautious about the name. Mental health days can have a negative connotation for some. Again, what we'd be advocating more is giving days off when people are struggling under pressure. But again, more neutral terminology may be helpful. Fourth bullet point, when we wrote this, we said pressure off, positive working environment. Again, at the moment, that is incredibly difficult, and I appreciate how difficult that is in practice to say. Very easy to say, almost impossible to achieve. We're all working in very pressured environments, especially at the moment. People are still mostly remotely, so again, positive work environments is difficult. But again, can you bear that in mind? Short-term adjustments. I'm going to talk later about kind of reasonable adjustments and a little more legal terminology about what we need to potentially do off the back of evidence, or when someone has a disability. Short-term adjustments can often not go that far, not something that has to be suggested by medical evidence, but again, short-term tweaks to people's roles, to people's duties, to people's hours, some more flexibility being offered. Is there anything we can do early to stop an absence from escalating? Final point with managing absence is almost inevitably, if you are getting absence that are not short-term in nature, which I'll come to, so things that are weeks and months, we will be needing medical evidence. So the thing that we would always suggest is don't wait. Medical evidence does not have to be a prelude to termination. Medical evidence can be an absolute critical part in achieving a return. So again, as part of your catch-ups and an early contact, we would be advocating get medical evidence as quickly as possible, but frame it in a positive way. That isn't we're out to get you, it's we're out to help you. So I would be suggesting, again, always base this on the facts, but if you are having absences over a month, I would be at that point immediately looking to get medical evidence. Always base it on the facts. Some illnesses, there's a clear return in 6 weeks and you won't need it. Equally, some issues you might go earlier, but that's the type of rule we'd be looking at. So looking at medical evidence in a bit more detail, generally we've got 3 types of medical input that we see on a regular occurrence. Sure, a lot of you will be familiar with all of these. Employees generally, employees GP, employees specialist, occupational health are your 3 main sources of medical input that we see. All have their strengths and weaknesses, and again, there shouldn't be a one-size-fits-all. quickly to summarise, obviously, employees GP benefit are they normally, and I will parenthesize normally, they're normally the quickest, they're normally the cheapest, and for very simple things, it's sometimes a useful input. However, they go with a number of cons that, again, a lot of you will be familiar with. Ultimately, an employee's GP is their patient's advocate. They will very rarely say anything conclusive about an individual that ever kind of would possibly look at someone not being fit to work. They very rarely offer any firm conclusions, and obviously they are often weak on what we call reasonable adjustments and adjustments in the workplace. So I very rarely recommend an employee's GP, but they're always there as an option. Specialist consultant, again, some of the similar cons that they really are obviously acting for their patient, but they are important when we are dealing with quite complex medical issues, because I'll talk about OC health in a minute, but if you're dealing with a particularly complex or difficult medical issue, your OC health specialist is not going to be have the relevant medical expertise to comment on this. So these are either when we've got a difficult disability question or a very complex diagnosis, you're going to be going to the specialist or a consultant. You don't have to go to their specialist or their consultant. You can go to a leading member in the field. We just need to be looking at a consent issue, which I'll touch on shortly. OC health is probably the one that we now see the most of, especially when we're dealing with stress and anxiety. Their benefit is that they are the best and the most appropriately placed to comment on reasonable adjustments in the workplace. They're probably the most savvy at preparing a report that can be used by a HR professional or a solicitor, as they're very well aware of them. The cons, slightly time, often with occupational health, they take a while. The cost is building up, normally £400-500 in comparison to a GP who can be tens of pounds, if not low hundreds. So there are issues, and as I mentioned before, if you've got anything which is a complex medical issue, they probably won't be qualified to comment. So again, combinations, we also look at specialist and OC health, for example. In terms of medical evidence, just to finish that off, when we're looking at medical evidence, one of the key failings I see day to day on these type of issues is that some organisations are pretty good and they've got pretty good processes in return to work and obtaining medical evidence. What they fall down is when they're actually asking for medical evidence, what they are asking of the expert. That letter of instruction to your expert is probably one of the more important things you're going to deal with in a sickness absence issue. The frustration with sickness absence is often the time it takes. Often the reason it takes so long is that we're not asking appropriate questions of the expert, or we're not trying to pin the expert down to questions. Because as I'll come into in a minute, often the issue with absence is we don't have a clear prognosis. So now, as you'll see further down, that what we need to know in prognosis is sometimes uncertainty isn't our enemy as an employer. If that is absolute uncertainty, the concern is reviews or see how it goes in a few weeks, a few months. That's where the delays occur. So the letter is absolutely critical. Again, should be done case by case basis. What we're suggesting is look at a few of these things. Again, if you're getting an opinion, put a job description in if there is one. If not, tell them what the job role is, what they do, and exactly what they do, including if this is a manual handling issue, computer issue, anything do. What do they do? Length of reason and absence, self-evident. Treatment, self-evident. Again, return to work. Has there been a return to work? I'll come on to a minute. We're not just dealing with sickness absence in cases of one long absence. We can have issues where they return, go off, return, sporadic attendance at work. So again, detail that. Adjustments, obviously, both that have been made already, and you are wanting to ask very direct questions on any adjustments that can be made. Prognosis, I've talked about, probably the critical question that people miss. Ask the expert what their prognosis is. Direct them. Do you think this person will return in 2 months, 3 months, 4 months? Because if we get answers, and and the more yes/no answers we can get, the better. So prognosis, ask. Disability, again, critical. I'll touch on. Ask the question: is this person disabled? Yes or no? Always ask that question. Redeployment is linked to adjustments. Can they be redeployed elsewhere? So if there is another option for them, ask them if that's suitable. Don't let them guess. So there's your evidence. Quickly, a few things linked to medical evidence. Bit of case law with you. All of this is very well entrenched in the tribunal. Again, basic test with a lot of these ill health issues is: would a reasonable employer dismiss based on the medical evidence that they have and the evidence that they have? So that's your central test that we're looking at with when we're dealing with medical evidence. Would you reasonably employer dismiss based on that evidence? And that's, again, back to that prognosis part. That's absolutely key, because that decision is based on that prognosis. And it's not to say that the medical expert would dismiss, it's would a reasonable employer dismiss. So that's always your test. Consent, big issue often I'm finding in practice, probably more so now than ever, not directly linked to sometimes ill health, but obviously COVID vaccines at the moment and other tests. Refusal to give consent. Brings us, as I say, into a whole layer of issues potentially with misconduct, but just keeping reference to sickness absence. The question obviously that comes from that is that can you dismiss if an employee refuses to give consent to a medical opinion? Case there of Elmbridge Housing Trust and O'Donoghue, well-established case. The short answer is yes. But again, it's fact specific. So if you ask an employee to consent to a medical, they refuse, what we then be suggesting is that you need to explain to that employee that as a result of their failure to consent, we are going to have to deal with this matter without medical evidence. And the possible outcome of that is that it may end in their dismissal, and we therefore recommend that they are, again, reconsider giving consent. We can't force people to get medical evidence. They just need to be made aware of the impact of them not consenting. Case finally, O'Brien and Bolton. This deals with cases you sometimes with a refusal to consent, but where medical evidence isn't obtained to achieve the original dismissal. Further medical evidence then comes out at an appeal hearing. This case was an unfair dismissal case where essentially no medical evidence at the original disciplinary, further medical evidence comes out at the appeal hearing, and the company failed to consider that case, obviously then held to be unfair dismissal. Bit of a technical point in appeals here is that it depends on your policy, but some companies have an appeal, which what the purpose of the appeal is to see if the original decision officer erred in their opinion. So often the case is the original decision maker might not have erred because they're on the facts they had, a reasonable employer would have dismissed. This is where you have to look at your appeal, and sometimes where an appeal of the decision isn't sufficient, and you really need to hold a whole new appeal hearing because you have new facts. So again, something to bear in mind, either fresh evidence or new evidence at the start comes as a result of the appeal, have a look at it, have a rethink. Potential outcomes, quickly just to summarise, most of these are self-evident. We're having 6 things normally as a result: no disability, imminent return; no disability, return with or without adjustments; no disability, no return. Similar with the disabilities, those 3. Ultimately, number 1, number 3, number 4, and number 6 we can deal with. The more difficult are 2 and 5. Obviously, 4 to 6, your disabilities, the consequences of getting it wrong ratchet up. So, talking of disability, as I said, the caveat at the start of the presentation is what I'm not getting into today for time and other reasons, and we're going to do it later in the year, is this isn't a disability discrimination seminar. We are looking at sickness absence, but obviously a critical issue in sickness absence is if this person is disabled or not. So, one more time, I rarely do in a seminar, but I'm going to read you a statute. So obviously, disability is defined, Section 6 of the Equality Act. Wording of the Act is A person P has a disability if A, P has a physical or mental impairment, and B, the impairment has a substantial and long-term adverse effect on P's ability to carry out normal day-to-day activities. So what does that mean? Bullet points, obviously on the slides, set that out. It's a physical or mental impairment. It must have a substantial and long-term effect, and it must impact on their individual's day-to-day activities. The bit that comes last is something that's not in that definition, but obviously when we're talking about substantial and long-term effect, the general rule is that if something is impacting someone for 12 months, or obviously the rest of the individual's life, that would be held to be a disability if it meets the rest of the definition. So again, things that are long-standing, that's where you're getting your disability definitions. Obviously, there are issues of things not being diagnosed but can have long-lasting effects. Again, stress, anxiety, depression being the key ones we see day to day. As well as that, we have a number of things that are held to be automatically classed as a disability. A few on there: blindness, severe disfigurements, cancer, HRV, multiple sclerosis. I've had a question: long COVID, question mark, and I think likely, but we will see, very unknown at the time. It might not meet an automatic disability definition, but it's a question. Point on automatic disabilities is back to my original point of the discrimination. Something being automatically classed as a disability doesn't mean they are automatically discriminated against. There is a difference when we talk about discrimination and disability. But if someone has those conditions, it's an automatic disability. The one to flag often is cancer in remission, still would be an automatic disability. Reasonable adjustments, just moving on, again, often when we have a disability, we then have a duty to make reasonable adjustments. Again, there are 3 requirements to that duty that applies really in three circumstances. First deals with where there is a provision, criteria, or practice, PCP, that we talk in legal terms, that puts a disabled person at a substantial disadvantage when compared to another person. Second element deals, same type of definition, but when a physical feature puts the person at a substantial disadvantage. Third requirement is when there is a disabled person, but the provision of an auxiliary aid, without that, they'd be put at a substantial disadvantage. So they are the 3 requirements really when the duty arises. So that's dealing with any process, any practice that you have in place, physical features, and auxiliary aids. They're your 3 types. We're then obviously looking at the word reasonableness. I could go on for hours about reasonableness. What are we looking for at a basic level when looking at reasonableness? So this isn't that we have to make any adjustment possible. When we're looking if it's reasonable, you look at, again, three things in an auxiliary: cost, effectiveness, practicality. So, and then the final one is it reasonable for your business? So this is where your business is key. So, your organizations aren't held to the same standard as Tesco, Barclays, NatWest, Sainsbury's, whatever, British Airways, whatever. These multi-billion-pound industries are held to a higher standard than again, smaller SMEs. So is it reasonable for your business? Again, type of adjustments, won't read them all out. Should have said slides are available. Again, a lot of it's self-evident, either a premises adjustment, equipment, or more change to kind of practices, redeployment, hours of work, change of location. Obviously, the one that we are already seeing and then is going to come again and again at the moment is going to be the bottom two on the left-hand side: hours of work, change of location, linked to COVID, linked to people working remotely now, having a disability and being unsure of a return to work, therefore making requirements. Do we have to make them work from home permanently? Do we adopt a change in hours? So again, something that's going to come up a lot, and you're going to see a lot of claims to go through. Right, timing wise, we are looking good. I am going to finish on short-term absence. I historically, dealing with this in practice, I used to think that long-term absence was the most difficult issue to deal with for companies day to day. And as I said, historically, that might have been the case. My opinion over 13 years plus of practice now has changed. I think the most difficult issue is short-term absence rather than the long-term. The long-term may be more time-consuming and maybe more costly, but short-term absences, I think, is the trickiest and the issue that more companies than not get wrong. And I'll come on to why I think they get it wrong moving forward. The leading case on short-term absence is an old one, 1988. Case of Lincox Cereal Packaging Limited. Again, I'll read out a very short summary here, but ultimately a case that went all the way to Employment Appeals Tribunal. Employee was suffering from short-term unconnected illnesses. They were ultimately dismissed without the company obtaining a medical report. EAT held that in the circumstance where there's no underlying health condition, a termination can be justified without obtaining a medical report. What they did in their judgment is they gave some helpful guidance on what the proper approach is to dealing with short-term absence, and that was as follows: that you needed to review the pattern of absence and the reason for them. You need to warn the employee of the required improvement in attendance, giving them the chance to make representations, and you need to consider whether there was a required improvement in attendance. If not, the dismissal is likely to be reasonable. I'll come on to the caveats with the Lincox case in a moment, but that, as simple as you can, is your tests. Warn the employee, give them a chance to make representations, follow an investigation, and then I'll consider is there an improvement in attendance. So to kind of consider that in a bit more detail, to get slightly technical, my preceding comments of why I think companies get this wrong is this next point. And we're getting relatively technical into reasons of dismissal. But if I was doing this live, I would ask a question and I would ask for a show of hands to ask, is a short-term absence dismissal, in terms of the fair reason, is it conduct, is it capability, or is it some other substantial reason? In my experience, most companies deal with this issue as conduct. And if I was to answer this, and in terms of how a tribunal answer it, conduct is probably the only incorrect answer of those three. The dismissal is likely to be capability or some other substantial reason. As I said, I won't get too technical into some of the substantial reasons dismissals, but ultimately, when organisations are using warning levels to deal with attendance, the problem they often face is they deal with that as a disciplinary hearing, whereas what they should be looking at is go back to the wordings of that case. It's giving obviously notices and the individual an opportunity to improve. So again, we often now suggest you call them improvement notices. But where this is an attendance issue, the dismissal probably should be SOSR. They can be capability issues and capability dismissals. And often where the capability dismissal, that's when, and again, I'll read a definition from case law. If the employee's skill, aptitude, health, or any other physical, mental quality is the reason for the dismissal, it will be capability. So again, this is this grey area that if we're looking solely at attendance where there is no ill health, it's SOSR. If there is a degree of ill health, it's probably capability. So that does cause a lot of confusion, and absolutely I understand why that would. Because often in any attendance issue, there will be an element of ill health. Even if it's ill health that doesn't amount to disabilities, it often will be. So what we recommend in practice, and on the ground, you don't need to get as technical as defining things, but we would, if you ever get to a dismissal on short-term absence, what we would recommend is that you generally plead it as a capability dismissal, but then you plead SOSR in the alternative. So that gives you almost two bites at the cherry. The key that we talked about in Lincock is the next few issues. Reporting, how you're reporting, how you track the absence, how you record the absence, and that process of improvement notices. You can call them warnings, but they are not disciplinary conduct. This is not misconduct. And you need a process that you are going through, that you're issuing improvement notices and giving an opportunity for that person's attendance to be improved. If it doesn't improve, a dismissal still obviously then can be fair. Point quickly is that you can actually dismiss someone on capability grounds when they are actually at work. When what we're looking at is obviously an overall attendance issue and obviously things in the grand scheme of things. Quickly mention Bradford factor. I know something that Robbie will touch on. A tool that a lot of organisations use to track this, especially if this is attendance. What they get wrong, as I say, is then they use it as a conduct tool. Bradford factor, again, for anyone who's not aware, is really an attendance tool made by an individual at Bradford University, hence its name, which is a way of assessing periods of impact. It's based on a formula which is calculated as basically, they say P squared times D, or P times P times D. P is the number of periods of absence, and D is the total numbers of days. What the Bradford factor does is essentially gives a greater weighting factor for people who have repeated periods of absence. So that the effect of P squared is the more absences you have, the greater weighting it is, rather than one day of 5 days would give a Bradford factor of 5, whereas 5 periods of 1 day gives 125. So you can see the weighting there is to deal with short-term absence. It's then done on a trigger level, can be different organisation to organisation, where you get that score. If you meet that score, that's when your improvement notices are coming in, measured over a period of time. Again, can be adjusted. So you can have Bradford factors that are applied differently. People come up with their own names for them and apply them differently. Final two points for me before I hand over to Robbie. The caveats to short-term absence and the process I have gone through is always consider disability and always consider this on a case-by-case basis, because even if people have short-term absence, it can be caused by a disability. These disabilities, again, it's something it may not be disclosed, but then there's a question of knowledge, and are you aware of them? So always look, is there something here in the background that is causing these absences? And then that should always cause you pause for thought, either because you need to make a reasonable adjustment, or that you need to consider, is this individual being either indirectly or directly discriminated against by applying Bradford factor improvement notices? Do you need to adjust your process? If we get all the way to dismissal, the only thing we would point out, despite my comments about this not being an unfair dismissal seminar, is that what we're always looking at here is what we legally call the Birchall test in an unfair dismissal. That ultimately is, does the company, they have to show the following: it had a genuine belief that the ill health was the reason for dismissal, it had reasonable grounds for its belief, and it carried out a reasonable investigation. Same test as the unfair dismissal: investigation, fair reason, reasonable belief. That is what we need to look at in every case. So that, if that's the end point, that should obviously be thought of all the way through in any absence case, whether that be short or long term. Robbie, I have done. I am 3 minutes over. I apologise profusely. I'll stop sharing my screen. Robbie can come back on. Again, I'll let Robbie introduce himself. As I said to start with, Evaluate is something that we use both on our scheme and at Chadwick Lawrence ourselves. All these issues we talked about in my presentation, there is a technological solution. And Robbie, I'm going to now show you how we can change your life when dealing with sickness absence. So I'll pass on to Robbie, and as I say, then we'll after Robbie goes, we'll have a look at the chat and some questions. So Robbie, over to you.
Lovely, thank you, Sam. Hi everybody. Okay, so I've logged in to Evaluate as Gary Fleming here, who's a fictitious person from a fictitious company, and I've landed on my dashboard. Evaluate is cloud-based employee management software, which comprises of several systems that you might find in isolation, such as human resources, health and safety, time and attendance, training, and communication. So it's a very comprehensive tool. I'm going to focus on the features around today's subjective absence management. And from the dashboard, there are a couple of things which may help in that sense. So we can see straight away who's off today from this little widget on the dashboard. We can also see our company's sickness trends. So this shows us a little graph along with our absence, average absence days, which we can then compare to our industry standard. These widgets can be moved around and would be dependent on your level of permissions in terms of what you might be able to see on here. So this one here, for example, that shows who is off today is a fairly safe one. But if you needed an extra level of detail and you wanted to see who's off because of sickness reasons, you can select the who's off sick widget. From there, if we then go to, from the perspective of a manager, my team, we can select our team member and open up their personnel file. If this individual has contacted us to inform us that they're going to be off sick, then we'd go to their sickness tab, and on their sickness tab, we can see their record. So this organisation has the Bradford factor turned on, and therefore you can see the score in this space here. And if you hover over the little gold asterisks, we can see if any action is required. And there's a report that I'll show you shortly, which produces a league table for the Bradford factor, so managers can objectively manage the absence. There's a bit of a summary up here, so it tells us here that this person's been off for 18 days. And over on this side, we can see any patterns that are emerging. So if we had an individual that favoured taking a Friday off or a Monday off, for example, that would clearly be displayed just here in red. At the bottom, we have a log of all of the sickness occurrence. And we've also got a summary here of what's been contributing towards the Bradford factor. So we can see here this person's had some time off due to COVID-19, they're having to self-isolate, and therefore it wouldn't be appropriate to contribute towards the Bradford factor in that instance. If we hover over the drop down here, we can see future years and previous years. So if somebody has an operation planned in the future, for example, we can record it here. The sickness works by default on a 12-month rolling basis. So this is looking at today and then going back 12 months. That can be altered to 6 months or any defined period of your choice. And the Bradford factor score, the thresholds within that can be altered in the settings area. So some businesses are more tolerant. For example, I think the prison service, they accept more physical, mental illnesses amongst their employees, and therefore they're a little bit more lenient with their scoring thresholds than, let's say, a conventional office environment might be. So to add a sickness instance, you simply click on the green button and this dialog box appears where you can choose the ailment. All of these are controlled within the settings area, so you can add or edit what's in this box here. And then you select whether it's a full day or a half day, and then you can choose AM or PM or a custom period. So if the employee went to leave maybe 2 hours early, then you can just select a custom period. And then you select the first day of absence and the last day of absence. If you're unaware of when the last day of absence is going to be, then once you've recorded this occurrence, there's a view button you may see just in the background here. You can click on that and then just move the dates along until you know that that employee has returned to work. We then have a series of toggles here. So if this absence relates to a known condition, we might include that. If it's something that we don't want to contribute towards the Bradford factor, so this is dependent predominantly on your company policy. So for example, some of the reasons in here I've already mentioned. If somebody's self-isolating, we wouldn't want to discourage those by penalising them for being off for those reasons. Also things like time off for dependents. We need to be very careful about how we use the Bradford factor. We can then indicate whether we have a return to work meeting scheduled with that employee, whether we have a fit note or self-cert certificate on file, or any other medical certification. And then in this box here, we can put notes. So I think it's fair to say what we would advise is making as comprehensive as possible notes, because if there was a scenario where you ended up in a tribunal situation, then having comprehensive notes at the time of the absence being recorded can really help you. Then we have the ability to upload a document. So this could be a medical certificate, hospital appointment, whatever it might be. We have a summary down here of how many working days are being taken off. So this takes into consideration an employee's working pattern, and then we can save. And that feeds several reports as well as the summary in here, which we'll look at in a second. But whilst we're on the employee's personnel, electronic personnel file, a couple of points that would be of interest are the medical information tab. So in here, we can store information about any allergies, disabilities, what to do if people are experiencing or displaying any symptoms, any adjustments that we might need to make. Any medication that they're on can be recorded in here, and any vaccinations. So this predominantly relates to COVID. It's a new feature that we added for that, but obviously could be used if people need to travel abroad, and therefore vaccinations are required for that. We have an accident log. So if somebody has had an accident at work, it can be recorded in here, and a notes section where you can just type a free text note. So for those catch-ups that Sam mentioned, you could just detail in here a quick phone call or maybe a meeting with the individual whilst they're off sick, and you can choose whether the manager or the employee should be able to see this note. You can upload a supporting file as well if you choose to do so. And then from here over to the reports section, we have a section on leave and absence. Within that, we have the Bradford Factor league table that I referred to. There is an indication down below here of what your company's thresholds are. So we can see a score of 0 to 49. In this instance would result in no action required, whereas a score of 650 plus is when we should be considering dismissal. So again, it just helps to maintain that objectivity when it comes to managing absence. Throughout our system, there are question marks. If you hover over them, it reveals information about what a feature is or does. So this explains, as Sam has just done so, how the Bradford Factor works and how it's calculated. And then you have a summary here of the total days, the total instances, the calculation, and then what the score is and how we get to that. The other report to highlight would be the sickness report. So in here, I can just change the date. So I'm looking at a year. So this sickness report will be sensitive according to permission levels. So for example, this guy that I'm logged in as, Gary, is an administrator. Therefore, he has permission to see everybody within the organization, but managers would only be able to see their own team. Employees, if you gave them access to this report, would only be able to see themselves. So here we are. This is all of the sickness in this organization throughout the last 12 months. If I click on this tab, I can see it in a graph. I can then start to drill down. So if I wanted to know everybody who had been off with COVID, for example, I can just select COVID from the drop down there. And I can see here everybody that was off in this period. If I wanted to just focus on one employee, maybe I had somebody that I suspected was a bit of a problem with their attendance, then I could just choose an employee and it would show me that person. I can export this. And if I was to invite this person to a disciplinary meeting, I can share with them their Bradford Factor score, and we can see how there's a running total of the score here too. And then there's a payroll report which the absence days can be added to. So you can then deduct absence days, and that will be imported into your payroll software. And I guess to complete the circle, back to the electronic personnel file, we can see here there's a tab around disciplinaries. So this is where you can record information around any disciplinary hearings, what the outcomes were, whether there was an appeal, when it was resolved, and when the signal or the disciplinary will come off your file, and then you can add any supporting files to this. So this could be, I don't know, CCTV footage perhaps of an incident. It could be investigation notes, minutes from meetings, and so on and so forth. So they're the main features around absence. That's just a fraction of what's available within the software. And Sam, I think that's me. Over to questions. You there, Sam?
Right. Sorry, Robbie, I'm back now. Yes. Stop sharing your screen. Yes. So just to kind of follow on what Robbie said there, we've intentionally shown you a tiny bit of that system, just to illustrate the options that you have to dealing with these type of issues. Evidence, data, they are your friend in these type of sickness management issues. So the more evidence, the more notes, the more records that we can have, the more effective your process will be. If anyone has any interest in obviously seeing Evaluate further, we just wanted to give you a flavour of that. let me know, and Robbie and I are more than happy to come and to show you the system in a much more detailed fashion, what it can do. As I started with, it will make huge differences to your organisation if you're not tracking absence. It's a tiny fraction of what it can do to deal with any other, obviously, HR issues, from holidays to performance management to rotas, so which Robbie can go through in much more detail. So if anyone has any interest in that, let me know, and we can arrange to give you a proper demo and chat through options. So in terms of what's left, I see there is one question in the chat, which I'll answer now. We've got a few minutes, so if anyone else has a question, either just say your name in the chat, or if you're a confident Zoom user, if you want to put your hand up, if you can do that with the reactions tab, and then I can get you to come off mute or video and ask a question. Carol asked a question in terms of sickness prior to holiday, which is a good question from Carol. The important thing to consider here is, despite the individual being on holiday, you still need information about their sickness. So how has their sickness impacted their holiday is the key question there. So if there is a sickness, then a recovery, then a holiday, that's a different situation than the sickness that then goes over the holiday period. The issue we're having in those types of cases, and there's some clear case law on that if someone is unable to have their holiday because they've been on sick, they should be given the option to cancel that holiday, and either then, depending on the company's process, whether you pay SSP or company sick pay, to take that day as a sickness absence rather than holiday. Their choice. Some individuals will still want to take it as holiday, generally connected to pay. Obviously, if you're only paying SSP, but if that is the case, they need to be offered that holiday back, because again, we can't have a scenario where they're losing their benefit. The holidays are connected to rest and from work, and obviously it's held that if you're on sick, you are not resting. So that's the answer to Carol's. If anyone else has any, we can hang on. By all means, if you want to pop your hand up or pop something in the chat just to say your name, I'll come to you. Right, we've got one from Magnus. So do you want to pop your mic back on, and I'll happily take it.
Hi, Sam.
Hi there.
I just wanted to find out in terms of the evaluate that you are kind of, because I came in slightly late, I might have missed at the beginning of it. Is this a software that is applicable across all HR tasks and roles, or is it just specifically for sickness and absence? I kind of didn't get the full picture of it.
Robbie, do you want to take it?
Sure. Thanks, Magnus. It's a very comprehensive tool that covers all aspects of employee management. So the whole spectrum of human resources. So from managing absence, but also leave, storing documents, sharing documents, tracking the documents have been acknowledged, read, signed. It's for employees and managers and administrators alike. So it's a self-service system. It also covers health and safety, time and attendance, training, and various means of communication. So there's some intranet features there as well.
Perfect. Thanks, Robbie. Well, again, the part I'd add to that is actually we've intentionally shown you a tiny bit of the system today, so it's relevant to obviously what the topic I was presenting on is sickness absence. It's something we will probably do again in future events and linked to other areas of law that I will present on. But as I say, if you have any interest, Robbie and I are delighted to come and meet with you and virtually, obviously, at the moment, and show you the system. No cost to that. We can demo the system for you and show you obviously the entirety of what it can do, not just the sickness absence tool that you've seen today. Perfect. Thanks, Max, for that. Any others? Pop your hand up while I'm waiting. If there aren't any other questions, just a kind of thank yous for me today. Massive thank you to Robbie for coming to show us the system. Thank you to Laura for kind of producing today, letting you all in. And again, and then the big thank you all for attending. I hope you found this beneficial. Keep an eye out. Program of events still going strong. Some more coming out all the time. So keep your eyes on your emails. Will come in the website. But otherwise, thank you for coming. I don't see any more questions. So yeah, thanks for attending, and I will hopefully catch up with you all soon. Thank you.